Welcome, and thank you for all for staying. My name is Matt West, and I'm with the library, the Poudre River Libraries, and we are just honored to be one of the sponsors for Startup Week. And thank you for being here, because some of you have been here since 8 a.m. or earlier, so I think next year we'll have another round of coffee to just keep everyone energized and not start fading at the end of the day. But I am so honored to introduce our keynote. Penn Street is an advocate and a public speaker. She is a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for the National Federation of the Blind, and she's pushing through legislation for equal rights for people with disabilities. Penn is requested nationally as a motivational speaker. She's going to share her personal story of overcoming barriers. Penn lives by an example of turning barriers into assets. Penn's professional background is in teaching, management, outreach, development, and she's just an all-around superhero. Today, she's excited to teach and to learn why people with disabilities can be an asset that you're looking for in an employee. So without further ado, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Penn Street.
Thank you, Matthew. We have a small group. If people want to move closer, don't be afraid. I really want to thank you for staying, as Matthew said. I know you've had a long day, so I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to share a little bit about myself and my story, and hopefully that'll help you understand from where I'm coming from. At age 9, I was bit by a rattlesnake. And the medication that they gave me to save my life triggered a syndrome called Stevens-Johnson syndrome. And Stevens-Johnson syndrome, SJS for short, is an adverse drug reaction. And it treats your body just like you've been in a fire. So I was treated in a burn unit. 75% of my body was covered in 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Even my organs were all affected because it was exactly like I'd been in a fire. My husband likes to say, I may look good on the outside, but you don't want to see what's on the inside. And the reason that I'm telling you that is because that's my little snippet of my story. But if you meet anybody who's living with a disability, they have a very similar story. And I like to call us superheroes because we actually do have superpowers. That's not a myth. I want you to do something right now. I want you to close your eyes, and I can't see you, so I'm hoping you're not cheating. But I want you to imagine that you just got a phone call from an organization that you've applied for. And this is an org you've been following for a while, and you're really super excited because you got the interview. I also want to mention that you're blind. Can't open your eyes. If you brought those security blankets, feel free to grab onto them now. You got the call, you're excited. You have to get to downtown Fort Collins on the bus. You would like to take Uber, but your funds, they're a little stretched this month, so you have to take the bus. So you have to get up out of your seat because they want to do this interview right away. You make your way downtown. You find the office, you're super excited, you walk in, the receptionist is there, asks if she can help you because she doesn't know who you are. You introduce yourself, and she asks you to sit down, and she'll go tell them that you're there. She's gone an awfully long time, but when she finally comes back, she's like, oh, they're all ready for you. She takes your hand, pulls you out of your chair, because blind people, we need to be led, not followed. You remove your hand, and you gently take her elbow, and you go back down the hallway, and you can hear voices, quite a few voices, but they seem hushed, maybe a little concerned sounding, but it's okay, you got this. You have a great resume. You have great work skills. You're ready for this job. You go into the interview room, everybody stands up suddenly, which is a little frightening, because why would they do that? And you ask, you introduce yourself, and you ask, where do I sit? Everybody at once is trying to give you directions to the chair. But you use your cane, you find the chair, you sit down, you're ready for this, you're pumped. Because again, this organization is something that's very dear to your heart. You really want this job. They go through the interview and it sounds great. They ask you all the correct, all the right questions that you usually get in an interview. And you feel good, you feel strong, everybody seems to be animated. And then at the end of the interview, you stand up, you shake everybody's hands, and you're like, I really look forward to hearing from you. And then all of a sudden, everybody's like, oh, well, do you want us to walk you to the bus? Do you need a ride home? And you laugh, of course, because, you're used to getting around without your vision. And you tell them you have other errands to run. You go run those errands. You're on the bus. You hear your phone ping. You listen to the email, and it says, thank you for the interview. We've decided to hire somebody else, but we'll keep your resume on file in case something else comes up. You can open your eyes now and just think about how that felt. So what you do is your buddy who told you about this opening, you text them, email him, and say, hey, I heard that they had hired somebody else, and it's okay, better luck next time. Your buddy texts you back and says, that's strange because it's still listed, and I know for a fact they have more interviews with people tomorrow. Now, we've all been there, right? We've all done interviews, and if you're shaking your heads, I can't hear you. We've all had that call back, right? We've gone the other direction. Yes, thank you. We've gone a different direction. We've chose somebody else with, a different set of skills. We've all been there. But for somebody who's blind or visually impaired, that happens a lot. 80% of people who are blind and visually impaired that are the working adults are unemployed or underemployed. Now, underemployed means you pass the bar exam, but you can't get a position in a law firm. So maybe you're working as a greeter somewhere. And not that working as a greeter is wrong, if that is what you want to do. But if you have your law degree, you should have the same opportunity as anybody else does to get a position in a law firm. So the reason is that I'm giving this talk today is because there has to be a solution. And I felt that here in Fort Collins, Colorado, at Front Range Community College, on this day, we could work on some solutions. Part of it is we need to change the why of why people don't hire people with disabilities. So we have to get the facts out there. Some of the facts have to deal with what's going on with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Are all of you familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act? Okay. The Americans with Disabilities Act tells you, as an employer, that you have to make reasonable accommodations for people who are working at your business, at your organization, who have a disability. Would somebody like to read the definition? That's up on the screen.
The adjustment made in the system to accommodate and make fair the safety system for an individual based on the needs.
Exactly. How does that fit into the other parts of our lives? How many of you use GPS system to get here today? Have you saying yes? Okay. Did you know that GPS was invented for the purpose of people who are blind and visually impaired? There's a wonderful man named Mike May. Some of you may have heard of him. You should check him out. He has a great book, Great Philosophy in Life. Mike May happens to be blind, and he's this incredible, intelligent person. Mike May was the first person that came up with a talking GPS system, and it was probably about half the size of your laptop, and it definitely wasn't as light as they are today. You actually wore it around your neck. It was very fashionable. And you would have to type in where you wanted to go. You know, it wasn't audible yet for your voice. And then this very horrible mechanical voice would talk to you and talk you down the street and to find out where you wanted to go. And it wasn't great, but so what's awesome is sighted people decided they liked that system. And now every single cell phone has it. Most brand new cars already have it built in. What about texting? Do any of you text? Yep, absolutely. Did you know that texting, it stands for SM, it's basically simple messaging servicing, SMS. People who are deaf and hard of hearing that use ASL to communicate, they were the ones that came up with SMS because not everybody uses ASL. So if they wanted to communicate with you, they had these, they were about the size of a playing card, deck of playing cards, so that they could, because a lot of people who are deaf don't have really great audible skills, and so they would type into this little machine, and then they would show you, and then you would type into the little machine. It was and now it's instantaneously, right? We all use texting. So thank the deaf community for our texting now. So there are, yes, exactly. What about did anybody take a ramp today for any reason? Walking into this building, maybe walking your dog. I don't know if any of you are skateboarders. Yeah? So yeah, exactly. Yes, Moses is a skateboarder. He's a smash on Facebook. Again, those cutout curbs, the ramps that we take for granted, that our FedEx guy or girl takes for granted, parents with strollers. Can you imagine getting around without ramps? You can thank those ramps for people in wheelchairs that asked for reasonable accommodations. Now in the workplace, so that's what we're here to talk about. And again, we're trying to change the narrative of the why people with disabilities are not getting hired. So in the workforce, reasonable accommodation, what does that mean? Exactly. So say the marketing team, they want a bigger Apple display so they can do their work better. Is that reasonable accommodation? Exactly. If finance wants to upgrade QuickBooks, is that reasonable accommodations? Yes. Exactly. If Penn Street needs magnification software put on her laptop so she can do her job, is that reasonable accommodations? Yes. Thank you. So I'm hoping you're seeing a little bit of a shift, because these two words in the Americans with Disabilities Act scare the bejeebas out of people who are hiring people with disabilities. Can any of you tell me a little bit about, have you ever been in a situation where you were going to hire somebody with a disability, or it doesn't even have to be hiring, maybe you're in a club and somebody walks in with a disability. And I could go into people who have, we call them hidden disabilities. But today I'm talking specifically ones that you can see. Have any of you had that opportunity to be in a position to hire somebody with a disability? You're shaking your heads, I can't hear you. Yes, no? No? Voice to text, great. I bet that cost you what, a couple grand? Yeah, exactly. Right. So in our office, our CEO broke her arm really, really bad last year. I mean, really bad. Like, you couldn't even come up with this bad of a broken arm. And for the first time, this person was thrown into, oh my gosh, I have a disability. Guess who was the first person that this person reached out into an organization where there is only one other person working there that has a disability? She contacted me because similar situation, she couldn't figure out how to type to do her work with just one hand. And so again, it was that text to speech. But luckily now there are free apps. And again, a lot of that accessibility is coming, the price is coming way, way down because people like you like to use those systems. Now I want to share a few stories with you guys about people that I know. And some of you might recognize these people. Let's see if I can get this to, it is tactile, but I may not. There we go. I want to tell you about, these are three Coloradoans. The one on my left, I guess it's your left too, is Scott LaBar. Scott LaBar was somebody that I mentioned a little bit earlier, he was top of his class. He passed the bar, LaBar, that's not a pun, just thought of that for some reason. He actually passed the bar the very first time, which I hear doesn't happen all the time. Scott also happens to be blind. He's been blind since birth. But Scott is one of the most intelligent people that I know, and you would not want to be on the wrong side of him, because I have been at times. So when Scott, passed his bar, he put out his resume, anybody reading his resume, you would have thought they would have scooped him right up. Really bright, young, tenacious person. And Scott also reads Braille faster than any sighted person can read text. So he's quick, he's sharp. For years, Scott kept putting out his resume, could not get a job. His dad actually sat him down and said, Scott, how about opening your own law firm? That never had occurred to Scott. With some support from his dad, he opened the LaBar law firm down in Denver and has many lawyers under him now, and the majority of them are blind and visually impaired. Scott also is the president of the National Federation of the Blind of Colorado. He is also the #1 lawyer for the National Federation of the Blind nationally. And whenever there is a disability case that comes up that has to do with blindness, that's a big case, they call Scott. So Scott is somebody who decided to be an entrepreneur. And Phil and I were actually sitting outside at the tables discussing this a little bit earlier what are the odds? There was a man at the other table who has a disability, and he started talking to us, and he was telling me about what he was doing, and I said, so you're an entrepreneur? And he said, yes, he was. And we started talking, and I asked him, I said, well, do you want to be an entrepreneur, or do you feel like you need to be an entrepreneur? Because some people, like my husband is an entrepreneur. He could not have a boss. If any of you know him, you know why. So some people, that's their dream, right? To be an entrepreneur. Somebody like me, I don't want to. I want the paycheck coming in weekly. I want health insurance. I want security. That's just me. So, so Scott and like this man that we met out in the lobby, they decided, it wasn't their dream, but they decided to become entrepreneurs. Now, there are lots and lots of people who are disabled that are entrepreneurs, and some of them are right here in Fort Collins. Do any of you go to the dispensary that's on Mountain? I can't see you. You don't have to put up your hands. It is owned by a man who's in a wheelchair. There's actually an acupuncturist who has extreme low vision that has a place of business in Old Town Fort Collins. If you go to an acupuncturist in Old Town Fort Collins and she hasn't told you she's visually impaired, don't let her secret out. It's her superpower. There's also, if you've been to Boulder, you've been to the Unseen Bean. That's a great coffee house. He's the owner and founder is blind. Insight Skills Center, right here in Fort Collins, the founder and CEO has low vision. She doesn't like to be called blind or visually impaired. And if you met Denny, you would not know that she was visually impaired. I can tell because I have that superpower. But Insight Skills Center is the only low vision rehab program in the state of Colorado that is nationally accredited. And that is because Denny, like the rest of us who have a disability that's out there either working or trying to get a job, we have to go above and beyond our able-bodied, and yes, I hate that word, but I'm going to use it, our able-bodied partners. And the reason is because when we go into an interview, we have to be sharper, we have to be smarter, we have to be better. And God forbid we actually get the job, we actually have to work longer hours. We have to put in more time. We have to work harder. And the reason is because we know in that interview, even if it comes down between two people and we have equal resumes, our interviews were equal, but if you have to choose between a person with a disability and the person without the disability, you are going to pick the person without the disability. And I can't see you, but I can hear really well, and I can tell your heartbeats went up just a bit there. But I'm hoping today, after you start understanding what an asset people like me are to companies, businesses, service clubs, your churches, whatever it may be, that we really are assets. Another person that's up here is Narissa Cannon. Narissa is a really, really good friend of mine. She came into my life from the work that I do at No Barriers. And Narissa is this incredibly sharp young woman who is on disability. She has a wonderful, beautiful dog. Hopefully you can see her dog, Cash. I think he's pretty awesome. Narissa bounces between job to job to job because the only jobs that Narissa is getting puts her still under the poverty level. Now she has the skills, she has the degree, but she can't get her foot in the door of somewhere that actually is going to use those skills and use her degree. And the other person up there is Rustin Hughes, who want to talk about superpowers. Rustin, he's a veteran. He lost his leg not in war afterwards. Really bizarre situation. Rustin is, again, one of the most incredible people. Some of you have met him. Rustin is another entrepreneur. Narissa is like me. She wants the paycheck. She wants the security. She is, I can get that for you. But she does a lot of outreach. She does a lot of outreach management. She's really tuned into the disability community, but I can get that for you. Rustin lives and works right here in Fort Collins. Again, he could not get a job. He kept trying and trying. And every time he showed up for an interview, Rustin shows off his leg, which I think it's beautiful. Rustin doesn't hide the fact that he has a prosthetic leg. And when he would show up for interviews, he wouldn't get the job. Rustin is one of the top jiu-jitsu martial artists in the country. He's trying to get it into the adaptive, what is it called? The Olympics, Paralympics, thank you. He's doing a lot of work to get that in the Paralympics. He's also a boxer. And so Rustin decided, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to open my own adaptive boxing and martial arts studio here in Fort Collins. And it just went gangbusters. And so what was happening is the parents would bring their kids with a disability to Rustin's classes. Or the spouse might bring, their partner. Friends would bring them. And those friends and partners and spouses and parents were over on the side going, wow, that looks really fun. I would like to do that. And so Rustin started offering classes to the able-bodied community. And now he's been so successful with it, he actually just shut down the nonprofit part of his business so that he can go completely for profit. And it's nice because when he shut it down, if any of you shut down a nonprofit before, you have to give that money away. And Rustin chose no barriers to give that money to. So these are examples of people, superheroes, that didn't let their barriers, they took their barriers and they turned it either to an entrepreneur like Scott. Scott knew how hard it was for lawyers with a disability to get into a firm. So guess who hires them? Scott does. And Narissa is going to find her place because she's young, she's beautiful, she's smart, and she's going to make it happen. Now we can talk about this next person. We'll talk about her later, though. So this is a little bit of my background. And when I talked earlier, when I had you guys close your eyes and talk about getting to that and how hard it was to get to that interview, and then you got the call. Well, for No Barriers, I interviewed at least 3 times. Now, I was volunteering many, many, many hours, and I had a full-time job at a different organization. But I interviewed 3 times at No Barriers. And I don't know if they just got sick of hearing from me and me showing up, oh, here's Penn again, oh, here's Penn again. But they brought me on contract, and I proved myself, and then they brought me on full-time. And so I have my dream job. I really, really do. But I'm very fortunate to be able to stand up here and say that. I get a paycheck. I'm covered under insurance. I get sick days, so let's talk about sick days. Because that is a misconception. So when we talked about fear a little bit earlier, is one of the things that when employers were asked why they don't hire people with disabilities, insurance came up like, oh my gosh, my premiums, I'm going to have to get special insurance. They're going to require more sick days. How many of you have fudged when you've called in on sick days? You better be shaking your heads. Here we are in Colorado. We got a fresh powder. You might call in, I can't come in today. After the Super Bowl, I don't know, they said some insane amount of people were out of work after the Super Bowl. I have never, ever in my adult life taken all my sick days. Yes, I do have superpowers. I had somebody at work that took 3 days off work because she sprained her ankle. 3 days for a sprained ankle. I have lots of friends that don't even have feet, and they don't show up late for work. I had a huge event in Iowa, and I had taken 2 weeks off vacation in Hawaii, and so I went from Hawaii to Denver. It was an overnight flight. Why do they do that from Hawaii? You always have to fly overnight. Get into Denver, got to Chicago, we missed our connection, we figured out the plan, got into Iowa barely in time for the concert. Put on the concert, huge success. It's actually the highest profit third-party event that No Barriers ever had. It was a great event. I did that having pneumonia and a cracked rib. Now, I thought I just had indigestion from the Mexican food we ate. The reason I'm telling you that is because people with disabilities, not everybody, it's not a blanketed statement, but most of us are in pain every single day. We feel sick every single day. So when somebody calls in because they have a cold or they think they might be getting sick, have any of you done that? Well, I might be getting sick, so I better not contaminate the office. Well, people with disabilities, not only can we work and play and live with pain and sickness, we don't call in sick for work. And people at my work, and it's not just that No Barriers, they actually have gotten on me. Penn, why aren't you taking your sick days? Well, because I don't need them. So talk about a benefit for hiring somebody with a disability. And we were talking earlier to this man that was outside that Phil and I were talking to. We were talking about, we know how to work under pressure. We know how to look at a situation and find a solution. Because for a lot of us, just getting out of bed in the morning, the second I wake up, I do a check with my body. Okay, what hurts? What do I need to use the least amount of energy to get down, get ready, get out the door? We are problem solvers. We also can take a situation like not getting hired and knowing that you hired somebody who had less qualifications than us and put our resume aside in case something else came up. We are tenacious. We know how to get over that. We're not going to get depressed because something didn't go our way. Because when you live life with a disability, rarely does anything go your way. So I'm hoping that you take away from today a little bit about what I shared up here. And also understand that some of the concepts that you might be afraid of, like reasonable accommodations, they're what you live with. That's how you got here today. Now, what I would like you to do, and there's not as many of us as I was hoping, because I really was. I was hoping we would come up with a solution today. No pressure. But I actually would like you to talk with each other, take about 5 minutes to talk to each other. If you're sitting alone, I'm up here, feel free to come up and talk to me. But I would really like to have some just conversations amongst yourselves about why aren't people being hired that have a disability, like your version of it. Maybe take some of what I've shared with you today and see if we can come up with a solution. And seriously, I want to take 5 minutes to talk amongst yourselves. And I can hear, I have supersonic hearing. Okay, everybody, I know you're having fun and you're coming up with solutions, but I don't want to keep you here all night. So if I can have your attention back up here. Wow, there's a lot of conversation going on out there. That's exciting. That is super duper exciting. That is another superpower of mine. Just ask my husband. I get people to do things that they don't think they want to do. I think, is my email up there? Okay, yay, worked. See, blind people can even run slide decks. I would like you to kind of throw out some ideas. If you want to raise your hand, you can, but you're not going to get my attention. So we're all adults here. I would love to hear what you guys kind of talked about or.
Can I share a quick story?
Yes.
Many years ago, when my kids were teenagers, the Special Olympics came to the town we lived in. It was a small town of 700 people, and when they came to town, for the entire state of Maine, it was the Winter Special Olympics.
Yeah.
And I took my kids out of school, and I had them volunteer for this. And it was the that. Best lesson I ever gave them, and it was the best lesson they ever got.
That's wonderful.
They're really kind kids.
That's wonderful. And then when they grow up, they're going to hire people with disabilities. Yes, Karen.
One of the questions that came up right at the end of our discussion, that is kind of stuff that was one of the newcomers that a little description of who new areas are and what they do.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things we talked about is place businesses or people that are involved other than the government with things like no barriers, with having a job fair.
Yes. That's a great solution. The National Federation of the Blind, they do, every time they do a convention, last year it was, I believe it was, in 2019, it was actually here in Fort Collins, and they usually do some sort of job fair. And I do not have faces, of course. Who was the photographer earlier that was talking about helping a blind friend? Jim? Jim. Okay, so Jim just spoke. He had a really good point. He had met a young man here in Fort Collins who, really bright, intelligent young man, was going for job interviews, and Jim noticed he wasn't dressing so awesome. And that is, trust me, is not just the blind and visually impaired. I've been on the other end of interviewing people. Maybe that's showing my age, but I dress for success is what I try to get that across. But Jim was telling me that really this young man was kind of in shock. Like, he's this tall, super skinny guy. He eats like a horse, but he can't maintain weight. I know, it's such a bummer. But Jim actually said, dude, you don't wear an extra large. You wear like a medium, maybe. So we had actually talked about that, like, and there are some programs out there that talk about, when you go to do an interview. Eric Wymeyer, who is the founder of No Barriers, talk about a freaking entrepreneur, right? First blind man to summit Mount Everest and kayak the Grand Canyon, started No Barriers. Julie here is one of our co-founders. Talk about an entrepreneur, right? So Eric actually he actually uses coaches so that he doesn't look like a blind person standing up at the podium. And Eric was actually one of the people that taught me it's good to have a podium, not just to stand behind as a barrier, but it actually gives somebody who's blind or visually impaired a context of where they are in space. Because I bet you anything, if I stood any of you up and didn't let you touch anything, you would probably fall over. My superpower. But there are resources, and we talked in my little group that there are resources out there. But the thing is that there's got to be this huge shift in the way employers are looking at people with disabilities. They need to look at us as assets and not like, oh my gosh, this is going to cost my company money. Or I might hire this person for 40 hours, but really, honestly, they're only going to give me 20 hours worth of work. It's not true. And you're going to learn, if you go to the panel tomorrow that Phil is running, we're even going to dive into this a little bit more, but 4% of the federal budget goes to adults with disabilities and the programs such as housing, subsidized housing, Medicaid, Medicare, and the small stipend of money they get. Now this is adults living on disability, Social Security. 4% of our federal budget goes into that one pool. Now, to put it in perspective, anybody in here 65 or older, you don't have to raise your hands. You guys get Social Security because you worked. You're only 1%, 1.5%. You finally did it. But you can see how this is really impacting the economy. And it's not, so there are millions of us, just like Narissa, just like Scott, just like Rustin, that we want to work. We're educated. A lot of us were top in our class. I made straight A's, I worked full time, and was on the dean's list in college. I know how to get the job done. But we're not getting hired. And it is awesome, the ones of us that break out and, and like Eric, becoming an entrepreneur, and that's awesome. But if you're like me, who wants that security, it's really hard out there. And I mentioned 80% of blind and visually impaired people that are working aged adults are unemployed or underemployed. And the statistic for other disabilities is high, not as high as people who are blind and visually impaired, but it's way higher than, because what are we at right now for the able-bodied population? 3.5% unemployment or something? Something like that. My gosh, do you remember a few years ago when it hit 10% and everybody was up in arms, the world's coming to an end? I would give anything to get anywhere close to that. And the superhero that I am and the people that I work with. So again, today, please take away, I hope you take away something from this and you won't be quite as afraid to welcome somebody with a disability into, whether it's your workforce, the communities that you work in, because we really are superheroes. And maybe, just maybe, you'll go back to your office and you'll pull out some of those resumes that you were saving in case something opened up and revisit them. I'm going to be around. Thank you for coming. If you have questions, I don't know when they'll kick us out of here. But thank you for coming, because you just coming today, you are part of the solution, because you're acknowledging that this is an issue and that we all need to work together to create that solution. So thank you.